My name is Renata Horton. I'm 19, a freshman working part-time at a cafe downtown, and I've lived my entire life in a house where love felt like a competition I was destined to lose. This morning, I came down the stairs to find 3 suitcases lined up by the front door, 2 pink, 1 black. Mom smiled at my older brother and sister. Your flight to Santorini leaves in 3 hours. This is going to be the summer you'll never forget. I waited for her to hand me my ticket. She didn't. Instead, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Renata, someone has to stay home and take care of the house. You understand, right?" My chest tightened as my siblings laughed, already arguing over who'd get the window seat on the plane. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I wasn't their daughter, I was their unpaid housekeeper. Would you still call this a family, or just a well-organized betrayal? I stood there for a few seconds, frozen, clutching the banister as if letting go would make me fall. Mom turned away as if the conversation was over. Dad didn't even look up from the newspaper, he just flipped a page. Noah tossed his sunglasses in the air and caught them with a grin. Bianca rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. "You're not serious," I managed. Mom exhaled sharply. "Renata, don't start. You know how much responsibility there is when we're away. Someone has to feed the dogs, water the plants, keep the place clean. You're the reliable one." The reliable one? That phrase had been her shield for years. Every time I asked for something, help with college applications, new clothes, even a ride to work, it was always, "Renata's the reliable one, she can handle it." I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded slowly, pretending to accept it. If I'd protested, she'd call me ungrateful. If I'd cried, Noah and Bianca would mock me for being overly sensitive. They left 2 hours later. 3 kisses on the cheek, 2 for show. One for me, like tossing a coin into a charity jar. As their taxi pulled away, I stood on the porch, staring at the taillights disappearing into the street. For the first time in a long while, I didn't cry. I felt something colder. It spread through my chest like frost on glass. When I went back inside, the house was silent, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. Usually, silence calmed me, but that day, it pressed down like a heavy blanket. I walked through the living room, touching the furniture absent-mindedly, Mom's polished mahogany table, Dad's favorite leather chair, Bianca's framed dance recital photos. My photo was tucked away in a corner, half covered by a decorative plant. I made myself some tea and sat at the kitchen table. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I stared at the steam curling from the mug and whispered to myself, "I'm done." Done waiting for their approval. Done pretending their neglect was normal. Done letting them write the story for me. I didn't know exactly how, but that morning, something fundamental shifted. After finishing my tea, I went upstairs to my room. It wasn't big, but it was mine. A narrow bed against the wall, a desk under the window, and a small bookshelf overflowing with second-hand novels. My sanctuary. I pulled out a small leather-bound journal from under my mattress. I'd started keeping that journal when I was 12, after Mom forgot to pick me up from a school field trip, and I waited 3 hours on the curb alone. Since then, every slight, every act of favoritism, every cruel word had been documented. Page after page of neat handwriting, dates, and details. I flipped through it slowly. March 14, Mom gave Bianca my dress because it looked better on her. I got her old sweater in return. And 2, Noah broke my laptop, said it was an accident. They made me pay for repairs with my savings. September 8, Dad took them to a concert. I wasn't invited because someone had to watch the dogs. Reading it now felt like reading someone else's pain, but it was mine. Every entry was a small wound that had scarred over, layered upon the next. On the last page, I wrote a single line, "If the truth ever needs to come out, I'll be ready." The first few days after they left were quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in the way an abandoned building is quiet. I went to work at the cafe, came home, fed the dogs, watered the plants, did the laundry, and kept everything running like a well-trained machine. Mom texted me occasionally, but only to ask things like, "Did you lock the back door?" Or "Make sure Noah's shoes are put away, I don't want mildew." She never asked how I was doing. She never did. One night after finishing my shift, I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through Instagram. Bianca had posted a photo of herself on a yacht, laughing with a cocktail in her hand, sunlight bouncing off her tan shoulders. The caption read, "Best trip ever, Santorini family goals." Family goals. The irony nearly made me choke. The comment section was full of compliments from friends. "You're so lucky. Your family's amazing. Renata must be jealous, haha." I threw my phone onto the couch and pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw spots. I wasn't jealous. I was furious. furious at how carefully they built this perfect facade while I carried the invisible labor that made their lives look effortless. Every beautiful moment they posted was supported by something I had done behind the scenes: laundry folded, meals prepped, bills paid on time because I reminded Mom. My contributions were never glamorous, so they never counted. That night, I cleaned the kitchen with almost manic focus. I scrubbed the counters until they gleamed, mopped every inch of tile, straightened the picture frames on the walls. My anger had nowhere to go, so it came out through order and control. When I climbed up on a chair to return a rarely used vase to the cabinet above the fridge, I noticed something wedged in the very back: a small, dusty wooden box. It didn't match anything else in the house. Mom hated clutter, especially anything old. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it down carefully, dusted it off, and placed it on the table. The latch was stiff, but it opened with a soft click. Inside were several yellowed envelopes tied with a thin piece of twine. The smell of old paper and cedar filled the air. One of the envelopes had my name on it, written in neat cursive: Renata. My heartbeat quickened. I unfolded the letter inside. My dearest Renata, if you're reading this, it means time has passed faster than I hoped. There are things in this family that must not be lost, and one day they will be yours to protect. The handwriting was my grandfather. I remembered him vaguely: warm eyes, soft voice, always smelling faintly of tobacco and pine. He died when I was 17. I was told his will was simple, that everything went to my parents to make things easier. I never questioned it, but this letter felt different. I read on. There is a place that carries our legacy, a piece of land where your grandmother and I built everything from scratch. I trust you to care for it, Renata. Not because you owe anyone, but because you understand what family should mean. My hands trembled. At the bottom of the envelope, tucked behind the letter, was a faded photograph. It showed my grandparents standing in front of a 2-story farmhouse surrounded by trees. The edges were curled, but the image was clear enough to make out a wooden sign that said Horton Acres. I whispered the words under my breath. Horton Acres. I had never heard my parents mention this place, not once. I searched through the rest of the box: bank receipts from decades ago, old legal documents, a property deed with faded ink but still legible words: Vermont and Horton Acres. My heart was pounding now. Why had none of this been brought up after Grandpa's death? I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the words from the letter looping in my head: they will be yours to protect. At dawn, I finally sat up and decided to call my mom. She picked up on the second ring, sounding distracted, like I'd interrupted a manicure appointment. Hey Mom, quick question: did Grandpa own property in Vermont? Silence. A short, unnatural silence. Then she laughed, but it was forced. What? Oh honey, those were just old stories, nothing real. Why? I found some papers in the kitchen cabinet, I said carefully. They had Horton Acres written on them. Her tone sharpened immediately. Renata, those are private family documents. You shouldn't be snooping around where you don't belong. I wasn't snooping, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I was cleaning. It was shoved behind a vase. Well, put them back and don't touch them again, she snapped. Then, in a tone that tried to sound warm, she added, you know how Grandpa was, always romanticizing things. He didn't mean anything legal by it. She hung up before I could say more. I sat there staring at my phone, unsettled. Her defensiveness wasn't normal. She was hiding something. Later that day, I spread the letter and the photograph on my desk. I traced my grandfather's handwriting with my fingertip. If what he wrote was true, then something very real had been taken from me. A property, a legacy, and my parents had buried it under a pile of lies. For the first time, the thought entered my mind like a spark. What if I could take it back? I spent the next few days thinking about nothing but the letter and the photograph. Every time I went to work, I found myself distracted, replaying Mom's tone on the phone over and over in my head. That sharp edge in her voice. It wasn't the usual annoyance. It was fear. And if she was afraid, that meant there was something real hidden beneath all those pretty family lies. At night, after closing shifts at the cafe, I'd sit in my room with the box spread out across my desk. I read the letter so many times that I started memorizing each line. My grandfather's handwriting was steady, deliberate. There was no mistaking his intention. Horton Acres wasn't some romantic story. It was a legacy, one he'd meant for me. I started to remember fragments from my childhood. Back then, before my grandparents passed, there were occasional visits to their house during the holidays. I remembered how Grandpa always treated me differently, not in a way that made me feel special, but in a way that made me feel seen. He'd pull me aside while everyone else gathered in the living room, hand me a cookie, and ask me questions no one else bothered to. How's school? What are you reading these days? You've got that spark in your eyes, kiddo. Don't ever let anyone dim it. Mom used to roll her eyes when he did that. Dad, stop filling her head with ideas, she'd say, half joking, but not really. I didn't understand it then. Now, looking back, it makes perfect sense. He saw something in me that the rest of them didn't want to acknowledge. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. If there was property in Vermont, if Horton Acres still existed, then it had to be mentioned somewhere legally. A will, a deed, something. And my parents must have gone to great lengths to hide it. That realization made me sick. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was theft. They had taken something that was meant for me, buried it, and carried on living as if it never existed. On Friday evening, I went to the attic for the first time in years. It wasn't part of my usual cleaning rounds, and Mom hated when anyone went up there. She said it was full of junk. But I couldn't shake the feeling that more answers were hiding in plain sight. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of cedar. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, labeled in Mom's neat handwriting. Holiday decorations, winter clothes, Bianca's dance trophies. There was no box with my name on it, not one. I stood in the dim light filtering through the small window, my hands on my hips, scanning the stacks for anything out of place. Then I saw it. A plain, unmarked box tucked behind the water heater. It didn't belong with the rest. I dragged it out, coughing as dust billowed around me. Inside were folders, old photo albums, and a stack of legal documents bound together with a rubber band so old it cracked when I touched it. Most of it was boring: utility bills, insurance papers, mortgage statements. But buried in the middle was a copy of my grandfather's will. My heart stopped. The first page looked normal: his name, the date, the legal boilerplate language. Then I flipped to the second page. The section titled Real Property was almost entirely blacked out with thick permanent marker. Someone had taken a marker and deliberately crossed out multiple lines, including one that ended mid-sentence. Shall go to my granddaughter, Renata Horton, upon reaching the age of 18. That was the word that had been cut off. Upon reaching the age of 18. I turned 18 last year. I sat down on the attic floor, the paper shaking in my hands. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure I didn't see this. It wasn't some careless oversight. It was deliberate, calculated. I took out my phone and snapped photos of every page. Then I flipped through the rest of the stack, hoping for more. At the bottom, beneath a pile of old envelopes, I found something else. A letter addressed to my father from a law firm in Vermont, dated shortly after my grandfather's death. I couldn't read all the words through the faded ink, but 2 sentences stood out. Regarding the transfer of Horton Acres to the named beneficiary, Renata Horton, please contact us at your earliest convenience to complete the process. I stared at those lines until they blurred. My parents had received this letter. They knew. They had known all along. My throat felt tight. This wasn't about being the less favored child anymore. This was about being intentionally erased. All the years I spent trying to win their approval, all the times I convinced myself they loved me, in their own, memories twisted in my chest like a knife. They hadn't just ignored me. They had stolen from me. I took the documents downstairs and spread them on my bed. The will, the letter, the photos of Horton Acres. My room looked like the headquarters of someone planning a war. And maybe, in a way, I was. I whispered to myself, they're not going to get away with this. For the first time in my life, those words didn't sound like a fantasy. They sounded like a plan. I couldn't stop thinking about that blacked-out will. It followed me into my shifts at the cafe, into the shower, even into my dreams. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those thick black lines, bold and merciless, like someone had tried to erase me from existence. The knowledge sat heavy in my chest. It wasn't new pain, exactly. It was more like an old ache that had finally been given a name. I started remembering things I had pushed to the back of my mind over the years. Moments that seemed small at the time, but now lined up in a clear, cruel pattern. Like the time Noah got into a minor car accident when he was 16. Dad bought him a new car the next week. He's a boy, Mom said when I asked why. He needs to learn to be independent. 2 years later, when I asked to borrow the family car to get to my part-time job, Mom said no. What if you scratch it? Insurance will skyrocket. Take the bus, it builds character. Or the time Bianca didn't get into her first-choice college. Mom spent weeks comforting her, telling her she was destined for better things. When my acceptance letter to a local community college arrived, earned through nights of studying after cafe shifts, she glanced at it once and said, "Well, that's affordable at least." I think the worst memory, the one that made my stomach twist when I looked back, was my high school graduation. It was supposed to be a celebration for both Bianca and me. We graduated the same year. She was born just 11 months before me, so we were always in the same grade. On the day of the ceremony, Dad showed up with flowers for Bianca. Mom had bought her a white dress weeks in advance, scheduled a professional photographer, and reserved a fancy restaurant for dinner afterward. For me, I wore a hand-me-down dress from Bianca's closet. Mom told me, "It still looks good on you, no need to waste money." There was no photographer for me, no special dinner, just a quick pat on the shoulder. Bianca posted her graduation photos online that night. Her in her perfect white dress, the flowers, the proud parents flanking her like she was the only child they'd ever had. In the background of one picture, I could see myself, blurred, half cut off by the frame, holding my own diploma and smiling through clenched teeth. I remember scrolling through those photos in my room that night, fighting back tears, telling myself not to be petty. But now, with the will in my possession, I finally understood. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't a series of accidents. It was a deliberate choice to elevate them while keeping me in the shadows. They had built their entire narrative around Noah the golden son and Bianca the perfect daughter. I was the reliable one, the convenient one, the invisible one, and they had profited from it. I thought about Grandpa again. His voice, his kindness, he must have known, he must have seen the way things were heading. That's why he left Horton Acres to me. Maybe he believed, naively, that my parents would honor his wishes. Or maybe he knew they wouldn't and hoped I'd be strong enough to claim it one day. The realization made my hands shake. For years, I told myself I just needed to work harder, to earn their love, to be someone they'd finally be proud of. But love that has to be earned like that isn't love at all. It's a trap. And I'd fallen into it willingly, too afraid to acknowledge how deep it went. Late one evening, unable to sleep, I wandered downstairs and stood in the living room. It looked so perfect. Mom's carefully curated decor, the spotless surfaces I had cleaned countless times, the family portraits on the wall. My eyes landed on one photo in particular, the four of us standing in front of the house, smiling. Dad's hand was on Noah's shoulder. Mom was holding Bianca's hand. I was standing slightly off to the side. I stepped closer. For the first time, I noticed something small but undeniable. The frame had been slightly cropped on my side. Whoever printed the photo had cut off part of my arm. It wasn't an accident. It was subtle but intentional. A cleaner composition, Mom would have said. A better balance. I stared at that photo for a long time, my reflection faintly visible in the glass. My reflection, half merged with the image of my family that didn't quite include me, something hardened inside me. I wasn't just going to be a footnote in their story anymore. I went back upstairs, sat at my desk, and pulled out my journal. On a fresh page, I wrote the date at the top. Then, in careful letters, I wrote, "They tried to erase me, but I'm still here, and they have no idea what's coming." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise to myself. A line drawn in ink that couldn't be scrubbed away. Once I put those words in my journal, something shifted inside me. It wasn't like a movie moment where dramatic music swells and the hero instantly becomes fearless. It was quieter than that. Colder. A slow, steady certainty settled in my chest. I wasn't going to beg for scraps of affection anymore. I wasn't going to keep pretending this family was whole when it had been fractured all along. The next morning, I made a decision. If my parents had hidden legal documents, there had to be a paper trail somewhere outside this house. Vermont wasn't that far. And my grandfather's lawyer, the one who'd sent that letter to my father, had probably kept records. During my lunch break at the cafe, I went to the small office in the back where we kept a landline phone. My hands were clammy as I dialed the number I'd found on the faded envelope from the attic. After 2 rings, an older male voice answered. "Law offices of Miller and Hayes, this is Tom Miller speaking." My heart jumped. "Hi, my name is Renata Horton. I found a letter you sent to my father years ago. It mentioned Horton Acres. I think my grandfather was your client." There was a long pause, then his voice softened. "Renata Horton, I've been waiting for this call for a very long time." I gripped the receiver tighter. "You have?" "Yes," he said. "Your grandfather was a good man. He made very clear arrangements for that property. I wondered when you'd find out." 100 questions burned on my tongue. Did my parents do something with it? With the will, another pause. "I can't disclose everything over the phone," he said carefully. "But I can tell you this. Legally, Horton Acres belongs to you. It has since your 18th birthday. If anything else has happened, we should talk in person." I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. Legally, it was mine. My parents had lied. All those years of being treated like an afterthought, all the times I convinced myself I didn't deserve more, they had stolen something that was rightfully mine. "Can I come see you?" I asked. "Of course, bring whatever you found, and Renata," his voice took on a tone that was both kind and grave. "Be careful. Families can become unpredictable when money and legacy are involved." I hung up, my hands still shaking. It wasn't fear exactly, it was adrenaline. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to what they did. I was taking a step forward on my own terms. That evening, I sat on my bed surrounded by papers. The letter from Grandpa, the photograph, the partially blacked-out will, the letter from the law firm. My journal lay open beside them. I started organizing everything into neat piles. Evidence, leads, questions. It felt methodical, almost clinical, like preparing for a long battle. I knew this wouldn't be easy. My parents were smart, calculated, and relentless when it came to preserving their image. Noah and Bianca had spent their entire lives benefiting from the roles Mom and Dad had assigned them. Challenging that structure would shake everything they'd built. But for the first time, I didn't feel intimidated. I felt ready. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I imagined their faces when they found out I knew. Not out of spite, exactly, but because I wanted to see the moment the illusion cracked. I wanted them to look at me and realize that the girl they dismissed as the reliable one wasn't standing in the shadows anymore. I thought about Grandpa's words again. "There are things in this family that must not be lost, and one day they will be yours to protect." I whispered the words into the darkness. "I'll protect it. I'll protect myself." The house around me was silent, but this time the silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt like the calm before a storm. I drifted off to sleep with the faintest hint of something I hadn't felt in years: control. Real control. And beneath that, a rising sense of determination that would no longer be ignored. The morning after my call with Mr. Miller, I woke up earlier than usual. The air in the house felt different. It was the same silence as always, but now it hummed beneath my skin, like a current. I wasn't just moving through their house anymore, I was moving through enemy territory. Every photo on the wall, every locked drawer, every envelope tucked into a cabinet suddenly looked like a potential clue. I made a list. Not in my journal, but on a plain sheet of paper I could destroy if I needed to. "Documents," I wrote at the top. Beneath it, will, bank records, land deeds, lawyer correspondence, anything signed after Grandpa died. It wasn't the kind of list I ever thought I'd make about my own parents, but here we were. I started with the home office. Dad always kept it locked, but after years of being the responsible one, I knew where the spare key was hidden inside a hollowed-out book on the living room shelf. A cliché, but an effective one. I dusted those shelves enough times to memorize every detail. The office smelled like cologne and old paper. On the desk, there were neat stacks of bills and folders labeled insurance, mortgage, Noah tuition, and Bianca dance fund. There wasn't a single folder with my name on it. I opened the file cabinet. Most drawers were predictable: tax returns, bank statements, insurance policies, but the bottom drawer was different. Inside was a black accordion folder with a simple white label, ARCHIVES. My pulse quickened. I pulled it out and placed it on the desk. It was filled with legal documents, all neatly organized. At first glance, it seemed boring: closing statements, property tax forms, some old business filings. But halfway through the stack, I found something that made my stomach tighten. A transfer of property form dated the year my grandfather died. The section listing the recipient had been filled in with Horton Family Trust, signed by both my parents. There was no mention of me, no signature from me, no indication that I had ever been consulted. According to this document, Horton Acres had been transferred into the family trust mere weeks after the funeral. I stared at it for a long time, tracing my fingers over the signatures. My parents had done this quietly, efficiently, while I was still 17 and too naive to understand anything about inheritance law. They hadn't even waited for my 18th birthday. They'd simply taken it. I photographed every page with my phone, making sure to get close-ups of the signatures and dates. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Next, I checked the safe in the closet. It was a small gray fireproof box with a keypad. I'd never been given the code, but I had overheard Mom say it once when she was on the phone with Dad. She recited it without thinking, their wedding date backwards. I held my breath as I entered the numbers. The light flashed green. Inside the safe were passports, jewelry, a few envelopes, and a small leather-bound notebook. The notebook turned out to be Dad's expense log. He kept track of large transactions in neat handwriting. I flipped through the pages, scanning for anything related to Vermont. There it was, 2 entries about 6 months apart, both labeled HA maintenance and legal fees transfer. The amounts were large, too large for maintenance. I took photos of those too. By the time I finished, the sun had climbed higher, spilling light across the office. I stood there for a moment, staring at the space where my father spent hours pretending to be the head of a respectable household. Now it just looked like a command center for betrayal. Around noon, I heard the front door open. Laughter spilled into the house. They were back. "Renata," Mom's voice called out cheerfully as if nothing had happened. "We're home." I froze for a second, then quickly slipped out of the office and locked the door behind me, returning the key to its hiding place. I shoved my phone into my pocket just as they rounded the corner, tanned and glowing from their trip. Mom pulled me into a quick hug that smelled like sunscreen and expensive perfume. "Thank you for taking care of everything," she said. "The house looks spotless." I forced a smile. "Yeah, of course." Bianca set her designer luggage down with a dramatic sigh. That flight was so long, but Santorini was incredible. You should have seen it." Noah tossed his sunglasses onto the counter and grabbed a soda from the fridge without asking. "I missed my car more than anything," he said with a laugh. They moved through the house like royalty returning to their palace. Watching them was almost surreal. If they noticed anything different about me, they didn't show it. Maybe I'd spent so many years swallowing my feelings that they assumed I'd keep doing it forever. At dinner that night, they launched into stories about their trip, boat rides, fancy dinners, a once-in-a-lifetime sunset cruise. I nodded along, chewing slowly, storing my energy. I had no intention of confronting them yet, not without leverage. Dad glanced at me mid-meal. "You've been quiet," he said like it was unusual. "I'm just tired from work," I replied. He nodded, satisfied with the answer, and went back to his glass of wine. After dinner, when everyone went upstairs, I stayed behind to clean up. Old habits die hard. As I loaded the dishwasher, I overheard Mom talking to Dad in the hallway. Her voice was low, but the house was quiet enough for me to catch bits and pieces. "The trust is secure. She has no idea. Legal transfer finalized years ago." My blood ran cold. I waited until their voices faded before retreating to my room. I spread the documents on my bed again, the letter from Grandpa, the partially blacked-out will, the property transfer forms, the expense log. The evidence was growing. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what they were capable of. I wrote a new list in my journal that night: confirm legal ownership through Mr. Miller. Collect all documents related to the property transfer. Locate any financial accounts tied to the trust. Identify weak links. That last item made me pause. Weak links. It sounded ruthless, but this wasn't a game. If I was going to challenge them, I needed to know who might crack under pressure, who might slip, who might give me something without realizing it. Noah was arrogant but careless. Mom was meticulous but emotionally reactive. Dad was calculated. Bianca was complicated. She was Mom's shadow, but not heartless. I had seen flickers of doubt in her before. Lying in bed that night, I realized something else. For the first time in my life, I was the one holding a secret, and that made all the difference. The following week became a blur of carefully planned movements. During the day, I stuck to my usual routine: work, chores, polite small talk at dinner, so that nothing about me seemed out of place. But at night, my room turned into a war room. I laid out the documents like puzzle pieces, going over them again and again until patterns started to emerge. The first thing I noticed was that the property transfer happened within a few weeks of Grandpa's funeral. That timing wasn't a coincidence. The trust had been created and signed before I turned 18, which meant they had deliberately taken advantage of my legal status as a minor. It was subtle, but it was brilliant in a cruel sort of way. Once the property was under the trust, they could control it entirely, and I wouldn't have even known to ask questions. I called Mr. Miller again. He picked up almost immediately, like he'd been expecting my call. "Mr. Miller, I found documents," I said. "A transfer to the Horton Family Trust. It happened right after Grandpa died." He sighed on the other end. "I was afraid of that. Your parents moved fast. I sent them multiple notices about your inheritance, but they never responded. By the time I realized what they'd done, they had already moved the property into the trust. Legally, they shouldn't have been able to transfer ownership without your signature after you turned 18. If they did, they may have violated the terms of the will." "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends," he said. "Do you want to challenge the trust?" The question hung in the air. Challenge. The word sounded both terrifying and exhilarating. "Yes," I said quietly, "I do." "Then we'll need every document you can get," he replied. Proof of the will, the original deed, financial records related to the trust. We'll also need to show that you were unaware of the transfer until recently. Your journal entries might actually help prove a pattern of exclusion. I hadn't expected that. My journal, the thing I'd started to survive emotionally, could become evidence. It was strange to think of my teenage heartbreak scrawled in blue ink being used in a legal case, but it made sense. Every entry was a time-stamped record of how they kept me out of the loop. After hanging up, I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling. It was real now. This wasn't just a quiet rebellion. I was going to fight them in a way they wouldn't expect. The next step was following the money. I started by checking the family's shared filing cabinet for bank statements. Most were in my parents' names, but I noticed a recurring account number listed on multiple property tax forms for Horton Acres. It didn't belong to their usual checking or savings accounts. I wrote it down, then waited until a Thursday afternoon when Mom and Dad were both out, Mom at her Pilates class, Dad at the country club. Noah was with friends. Bianca was home, though. I found her in her room painting her nails, music playing softly. "Hey," I said, leaning against the doorframe. She looked up. "Hey, you're actually talking to me voluntarily. What's up?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Do you ever wonder why Mom and Dad treat us differently?" She laughed, but there was something tired in the sound. "Oh, this again?" "I'm serious," I said. "I mean, think about it. They've always had their roles set. Noah's the golden boy, you're the princess, and I'm the what? The maid?" She put down the nail polish and raised an eyebrow. "You've been thinking too much." "Maybe," I said. "But you've noticed it too, haven't you?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me. "It's not like I don't see things," she said finally. "Mom's controlling, you know that." That was more honesty than I'd ever gotten from her before. I took a breath. "What if I told you they've been hiding something big from me, from both of us?" "Like what?" I didn't tell her everything, not yet. I mentioned the property in Vermont, Horton Acres, how Grandpa had left something behind. Her reaction was unexpected. Instead of laughing it off, she looked genuinely surprised. "I've never heard of that place," she said. "Are you sure? I found the will, letters, documents, they blacked out my name. They transferred the property to a family trust without telling me." Bianca stared at me, her expression shifting from confusion to unease. "That's really messed up." "Yeah," I said softly. "It is." She leaned back on her bed, exhaling. "You know, Mom's always been obsessed with control. She plans everything, who gets what, who does what, how we look to the outside world. It wouldn't surprise me if she tried to rewrite history too." That was the opening I needed. "I'm going to challenge the trust," I said. "Legally, but I need more information." Her eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." She looked conflicted, like two sides of her were pulling in opposite directions. One side, the loyal daughter who followed Mom's lead without question. The other, the young woman who'd started to chafe against that control. I could see it happening right in front of me. "I can't betray Mom," she said quietly. "I'm not asking you to," I replied. "I'm asking you to think about what's right. If Grandpa left something to me and they took it, what makes you think they wouldn't do the same to you someday?" That struck a nerve. Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer, but she didn't throw me out either. Later that night, I overheard Bianca arguing with Mom downstairs. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough to piece it together. "Why didn't you tell us?" "It's none of your concern. It is if you're hiding things from us." Hearing her challenge Mom, even slightly, was shocking. Bianca had never raised her voice to her before. It was a small crack in the wall they'd built, but it was there. The next day, Bianca slipped a small envelope under my door. Inside was a photocopy of a document I hadn't seen before, a bank statement for the Horton Family Trust account. At the bottom was the balance. I stared at the number for a long time. It was huge, more than I'd imagined. Horton Acres wasn't just sentimental land. It was money, serious money. Written in Bianca's neat handwriting on the back of the statement were 4 words: "I'm not blind anymore." I sat on my bed, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. That was the first real sign that someone inside the family might not be fully on their side anymore. It wasn't trust yet, but it was something. I took a day off from the cafe the following week and took an early morning train to Vermont. The landscape outside the window changed gradually, from urban gray to rolling fields, forests, and scattered farmhouses. It felt strange to think that somewhere out there, among those trees, was land with my name on it. Land I'd never seen. Land my parents had tried to erase me from. Mr. Miller's office was in a quiet brick building on a side street in Burlington. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves of legal books and framed black and white photos. He greeted me at the door himself, a tall, silver-haired man with sharp eyes that had clearly seen more than a few family disputes in his lifetime. Renata, he said warmly, shaking my hand. I wasn't sure when I'd meet you, but I'm glad it's now. I sat across from him in his office, my bag full of copies of the documents I'd gathered. He opened each one carefully, nodding as he scanned them. When he reached the transfer form to the family trust, his brow furrowed. This is exactly what I suspected, he said. Your parents moved the property before you turned 18, and it looks like they never filed the amended will with the probate court. Legally, this is very shaky. Can they just do that? I asked. They can try, he said dryly. But from what I can see, your grandfather's will is valid, and it clearly states that Horton Acres goes to you on your 18th birthday. Any transfer without your signature could be challenged. If we move quickly, we can file a petition to freeze any further transactions related to the property. I nodded, absorbing his words. What do you need from me? First, a sworn affidavit stating when you discovered this information, he said. Second, we'll need to file a formal request for the original will from the court's archives. If the original matches what you found, that's very strong evidence. Third, we should prepare for resistance. From the way your parents handled this, I doubt they'll give up easily. He slid a folder across the table to me. This is a copy of the land deed from when your grandparents bought Horton Acres. It's still in their name, which means the trust transfer is technically provisional until all legal formalities are complete. That's why your parents have been quiet. They know this could blow up if anyone challenges it. I held the folder carefully like it was something sacred. I want to do this, I said. Then we'll do it, he replied. But Renata, this won't just be a legal battle. This will be personal. They'll come after you emotionally, financially, maybe even publicly. Are you ready for that? I thought about Mom's sharp voice, Dad's cold detachment, Noah's arrogance, Bianca's wavering loyalty. I thought about every time I'd been treated like an afterthought. Yes, I said, I am. On the train ride home, I stared out the window, the Vermont countryside passing by. It wasn't a fantasy anymore. I had a lawyer. I had documents. I had a legal path. The thought filled me with equal parts excitement and fear. When I got back, the house was buzzing with post-vacation energy. Mom was on the phone in the kitchen, pacing as she talked to someone about a charity gala. Dad was in the office with the door closed. Noah was sprawled on the couch with his shoes on the coffee table. Bianca was sitting by the window, scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, she gave me a subtle nod. It wasn't much, but it was acknowledgement. At dinner, Mom was unusually attentive. She kept glancing at me between bites of salad, like she was trying to read something on my face. You've been out all day, she said casually. Where'd you go? Vermont, I replied without elaborating. Her fork froze midair. Vermont? Yeah, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Just needed a change of scenery. Dad looked up from his plate, his eyes narrowing. Why Vermont? I shrugged. Just felt like it. It wasn't the best cover story, but it was enough to plant a seed. Mom exchanged a look with Dad, a quick, subtle flicker, but I caught it. They were worried. After dinner, I went upstairs and called Mr. Miller to confirm the next steps. He'd already drafted the affidavit and scheduled a filing date with the court in 2 weeks. Once the petition is filed, he explained, they'll be notified. That's when things will get interesting. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. 2 weeks. That was the time I had to prepare before my parents found out what I was doing. 2 weeks to tight my case, gather everything I could, and make sure I wasn't blindsided. The next few days were spent quietly building my file. I went through old storage boxes in the garage, combed through drawers, checked old emails on the family computer. One night, while everyone was asleep, I found something on Dad's laptop that made my stomach drop. An email thread between him and a development company. They'd been discussing selling Horton Acres to build a luxury resort. The emails dated back months. I saved every message onto a USB drive and hid it under the floorboard beneath my bed. The development plans were detailed, projected revenue, building schematics, estimated sale price. It wasn't just a passive theft anymore. They were planning to cash out. I realized then that this wasn't just about protecting a piece of land. If I didn't act, they were going to erase Horton Acres completely. Bulldoze it. Replace my grandparents' legacy with a swimming pool and overpriced cottages. That night, Bianca knocked softly on my door. When I opened it, she looked nervous. Can we talk? She whispered. We sat on the edge of my bed. She fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. Mom's been acting weird since dinner. She asked me if I noticed anything unusual about you lately. I forced a casual smile. What did you say? I told her no, she said quickly. But what's going on? You went to Vermont. You're hiding something? I studied her face. She wasn't accusing me, she was curious, maybe even concerned. I decided to give her a little more. I met Grandpa's lawyer, I said quietly. He confirmed everything. The land, the will, it's mine, Bianca. Legally, they stole it. Her eyes widened. Holy shit. Yeah, I said, and they're planning to sell it. I found the emails. She covered her mouth with her hand. If Mom finds out, she'll lose it. I know, I said. That's why you can't say anything. I won't, she said quickly. I swear. For the first time, I believed her. There was something different in her voice. She wasn't just humoring me. She was on the edge of something too, maybe her own disillusionment with them. When she left, I locked my door and sat on the floor, breathing slowly. The game had started, whether they knew it or not. Over the next few days, I watched them more closely than ever. It was subtle at first, the way Dad would linger a little longer in his office after dinner, the way Mom's voice dropped when she made phone calls, the occasional glance they exchanged when they thought no one was watching. They were preparing for something. They didn't know what, but they sensed it. Noah, on the other hand, was oblivious. He was too wrapped up in himself to notice anything beneath the surface. If Dad was the brain and Mom was the strategist, Noah was the careless prince, the one who always assumed the castle walls would hold. That made him dangerous, but also vulnerable. One Friday afternoon, while everyone was out, Mom and Dad at a charity event, Bianca at a friend's apartment, I found Noah's car keys on the kitchen counter. He'd taken Bianca's car to meet his friends, leaving his unlocked in the driveway. It wasn't the car I was interested in. It was what was inside. Noah wasn't exactly discreet about his personal life. He treated the car like an extension of his room, papers, receipts, gym bags, sunglasses, and most importantly, his laptop bag tossed carelessly in the back seat. I slipped into the car and opened the laptop. No password. Typical. His arrogance wasn't just a personality trait, it was a security flaw. Most of it was what I expected: college assignments he hadn't finished, playlists, half-written emails. But buried in his downloads folder was a PDF file named Investment Proposal Horton. My stomach tightened as I opened it. It was a presentation, 30 slides. He had been working with Dad on the development deal. The document outlined the full plan: sell Horton Acres to a development company for a massive sum, then reinvest part of the profits into Noah's startup, a vague concept involving real estate tech that didn't even exist yet. He had detailed revenue projections, slides with his name under future managing director, and photos of the proposed resort. I stared at his name on the slides, my hands gripping the laptop. He hadn't just known about the plan, he was part of it. He was counting on it. I transferred the entire file onto my USB drive, then carefully closed everything and returned the laptop to its exact position. Later that night, Noah came home drunk. He stumbled through the kitchen, humming to himself, keys jangling. I watched from the staircase, silent in the dark. He opened the fridge, drank straight from the milk carton, and then muttered to himself, "Soon, real money, no more Mom's leash." He laughed, loud and stupid, before heading upstairs. I knew then that Noah wasn't just a pawn. He was a liability to them and to me. If I pushed in the right place, he could break. The next day, I casually approached him while he was playing video games in the living room. "So," I said, sitting down on the couch next to him, "what's it like being Dad's business partner now?" He glanced at me suspicious. "What are you talking about?" I shrugged. "Oh, nothing. Just overheard Dad saying you're going to be running the Vermont thing together. Sounds like a big deal." His expression shifted from suspicion to smugness in seconds. "Yeah, well, someone has to keep the family legacy alive." "Guess I'm the chosen one." "Wow," I said flatly. "That's impressive." He paused the game and leaned back, grinning. "Look, when this thing takes off, I'm not sticking around here. I'll have my own place. Real power. Dad trusts me, not like you. You've always been the sidekick." It stung, but I didn't show it. Instead, I gave him a slow smile. "You're right, Noah, you've always been the star." He nodded, satisfied, completely missing the trap I was setting. For the next week, I fed his ego in small doses. Casual compliments, feigned interest in his business plans. Late one night, after a few beers, he bragged about how the sale was basically a done deal and how Mom and Dad had legal stuff all wrapped up. "They can't touch me," he said. "It's all under the trust, and I've got a clause in the deal that gives me a cut." "You have your own clause?" I asked, pretending to be impressed. "Of course," he said, slurring slightly. "Dad made it official. Once the sale goes through, a chunk of the profit goes straight into my account. Bianca gets a lifestyle allowance, and you," he laughed. "Well, you get a pat on the head, I guess." He passed out on the couch not long after. I waited until he was snoring before slipping his phone from his pocket. I'd noticed earlier that he never set a lock screen. It took me less than a minute to find what I needed: a string of text messages between him and a project manager at the development firm. They weren't just discussing the deal, they were bragging about it. Noah had sent them a photo of the farmhouse at Horton Acres with the caption, "Future Playground, Phase 1. I sent every message to myself, then placed the phone back before he stirred. The house dynamic began to shift in subtle ways after that. Mom grew more watchful, asking me small, probing questions at random times. "Where were you today? Why are you spending so much time in your room? You've been quiet lately." Dad, meanwhile, was colder. He didn't question me directly, but I could feel his eyes on me at the dinner table, measuring, calculating. He'd always underestimated me, and I needed him to keep doing that for a little while longer. Bianca noticed it too. One afternoon, she caught me in the hallway and whispered, "They're getting suspicious." "I know," I whispered back. "You need to be careful." Her warning was genuine. That told me she was shifting further from their side, even if she didn't fully realize it yet. At night, I reviewed everything I'd gathered: the will and Grandpa's letter, property transfer documents, bank statements, emails from Dad's laptop, Noah's investment proposal, text messages with the developer. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. This wasn't just a family keeping secrets. It was a coordinated, deliberate attempt to rewrite the future. And I was almost ready to flip their entire plan upside down. 2 weeks passed faster than I expected. Every day felt like walking a tightrope with no safety net. On the surface, I went to work, came home, smiled at family dinners, nodded through Mom's endless chatter about upcoming galas and Dad's discussions about legacy. But beneath the surface, everything was shifting. Mr. Miller filed the petition to freeze the property transfer on a Tuesday morning. I signed the affidavit with steady hands, even though my heart was pounding. "Once they receive this," he said, sliding the stamped document into his folder, "the real game begins." 3 days later, the notice was delivered to my parents' mailbox. I was in the kitchen when Dad walked in with the letter in his hand. He didn't say a word at first. He stood there, reading, his face going pale before hardening into something cold. Mom came in moments later, drying her hands on a towel, and when she saw his expression, she froze. He handed her the letter. She read it, her jaw clenched. Then both of them looked at me. "What is this?" Mom's voice was sharp, brittle. I kept my tone even. "It's a legal petition." "For what?" Dad demanded. "For what's mine," I said simply. The silence stretched for a few seconds, then Mom laughed, a high, incredulous sound. "You're suing us?" "I'm challenging the trust," I corrected. "Legally." Dad stepped closer. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, meeting his eyes. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Then Mom set the letter down on the counter with surgical precision, like she was preparing for battle. "Renata," she said, her voice suddenly soft and dangerous, "families don't take each other to court." I held her gaze. "Then maybe families shouldn't steal from each other." Her eyes flashed. Dad's lips thinned. Noah, who had been lurking by the stairs, stepped forward with a grin that made my skin crawl. "Wow, didn't think you had it in you, Ren." "Shut up, Noah," Bianca snapped from behind him. Everyone turned. It was the first time she'd spoken up like that, and the room went still for a moment. Dad broke the silence. "We'll handle this," he said to Mom. "Call Peterson, tonight." Peterson was their attorney, the one who handled everything from tax loopholes to trust structures. The moment his name left Dad's mouth, I knew the lines had officially been drawn. That night, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a battlefield. The following days were a storm of hushed conversations and locked doors. Mom spent hours on the phone in the study with Peterson. Dad started leaving early and coming home late. Noah strutted around the house as if he were untouchable, throwing out snide remarks every time he passed me in the hallway. "So, what's your endgame, Ren?" he asked one night, leaning against the kitchen counter with a beer in his hand. "You think a judge is gonna give you a farm because of some dusty letter?" I didn't bother answering. "Newsflash," he continued, smirking. "I'm already part of the deal. You're not. You're a side character trying to rewrite the script." I stepped closer until we were almost face to face. "Then you'd better hope the script doesn't get rewritten, Noah, because if it does, you're going to lose everything." For once, he didn't have a comeback. He pushed off the counter and walked away muttering under his breath. Bianca started avoiding family dinners altogether. She'd retreat to her room after work, door locked, lights off. One night, I knocked gently, and after a pause, she let me in. She looked tired. "They're losing it downstairs," she whispered. "Mom's freaking out about optics. She's worried this is going to ruin the family's reputation." "Good," I said. "She should be worried." "Peterson told them they could fight it," Bianca went on. Something about arguing that you weren't mentally stable when the will was executed, that you went through therapy when you were 15. My blood went cold. That was for anxiety, I said, and it was confidential. Bianca nodded. They're not above using it. I sank onto her bed, gripping my knees. I'd expected them to fight dirty, but hearing it confirmed made my stomach twist. Thanks for telling me. She hesitated, then said quietly, I'm not doing this for them anymore. That was the clearest declaration of sides I'd heard from her yet. The atmosphere grew heavier with each passing day. I'd come home from work and find Mom sitting in the dark living room, staring at the wall, rehearsing conversations in her head. Dad would emerge from the office with crisp documents and a face carved from stone. Noah was the only one who seemed to enjoy it, like the drama was entertainment for him. Late one night, I overheard Mom and Dad in their bedroom. Their voices were low but sharp. She's not backing down, Mom said. She actually thinks she can win. She doesn't have the resources, Dad replied. We do, she'll burn out. What if she does? Mom's voice cracked slightly. What if Peterson's wrong? She's a child, Dad said. She's always been weak. We raised her. We know her. They didn't know me anymore. Mr. Miller called me the next morning with updates. They've retained counsel, he said. Peterson's a skilled lawyer, but their position isn't as strong as they think. Their biggest weakness is timing. They moved the property before you were 18. We can exploit that. He also advised me to prepare emotionally. They'll attack your credibility, he said. Your parents' strategy will likely be personal, painting you as unstable, irresponsible, or vindictive. Are you ready for that? I thought about Dad's words from the night before. She's always been weak. Yes, I said, I'm ready. That night, as I walked past the living room, Mom stopped me. She was sitting alone, a glass of wine in hand, her posture perfectly straight. Renata, she said calmly, this is your last chance to drop this. I met her eyes. No, Mom, it's my first chance not to. Something flickered in her expression, pride, anger, maybe fear. Then she nodded slowly. Then don't say I didn't warn you. She set down her glass and walked upstairs without another word. The war had officially begun. The days after the letter hit felt like living inside a pressure cooker. Every corner of the house seemed to hum with tension. The clinking of cutlery at dinner became louder. The air felt heavier. Even the family dog avoided the living room. Mom turned from warm hostess to political strategist overnight. She started calling relatives, family friends, anyone who might be useful. I overheard snippets of her conversations, carefully curated narratives about a misunderstanding, a phase I was going through, an unfortunate legal confusion. She was rewriting the story before anyone else could. Dad became colder. He didn't yell, didn't confront me directly. He started leaving folders strategically on the kitchen counter as if to remind me that he was the one who had power. Financial statements, legal memos, even old report cards that conveniently highlighted my weaker high school years. It was psychological warfare, subtle but cutting. Noah, of course, couldn't resist gloating. One night he cornered me in the hallway, smirking. Peterson, going to destroy you. He's the reason half of Dad's enemies backed off. You think you're special? I walked past him without answering. His words were meant to sting, but at this point, Noah's arrogance was predictable. Bianca, on the other hand, became my quiet ally. She wasn't confrontational, but she started doing small things that mattered, keeping Mom distracted when I needed to make phone calls, slipping me bits of information she overheard. One afternoon, she whispered, Peterson's strategy meeting is tonight. Mom and Dad are talking about using your therapy records. I froze. How would they even get those? They still have access through the family insurance account, she said. They're planning to argue that you were emotionally unstable at the time Grandpa wrote the will. I laughed bitterly. I was 15. I had panic attacks, not hallucinations. They don't care about truth, Bianca said quietly. They care about winning. That night, while they gathered in the study with Peterson, I sat in my room and called Mr. Miller. They're going to use my old therapy records, I said. I figured they might, he replied. It's a classic move, attack your credibility to undermine your claim. We'll file a motion to seal your medical history and argue that it's irrelevant to the will's execution. The will was written by your grandfather, not by you. Your mental state as a teenager has no bearing. Hearing his calm, legal tone grounded me. Okay, I said. Do it, he hesitated. Renata, I need to warn you. This is going to get uglier. Once we file for discovery, both sides will have access to a lot of personal information. They'll go after anything they can find. I swallowed hard. I know. The next morning, Mom invited me to talk in the living room. She sat on the couch with a folder in her lap, like a teacher waiting to discipline a student. Renata, she began smoothly, this doesn't have to go any further. We can fix this as a family. There's nothing to fix, I said. I'm just claiming what's legally mine. She tilted her head with a patronizing smile. Sweetheart, you're being manipulated. Lawyers love cases like this. They'll take your money, fill your head with fantasies, and when you lose, they'll leave you with nothing. I'm not being manipulated, I said. I made this choice. Her smile disappeared. She opened the folder. Inside were copies of my high school therapy notes, insurance claims, and a few disciplinary records, nothing serious, just minor things like skipping class when I had panic attacks. She laid them out like evidence. Do you think a judge will trust someone who couldn't even handle sophomore year? I stared at the papers. My 15-year-old self looked back at me from between the lines, scared, anxious, desperate to be invisible, but I wasn't 15 anymore. Yeah, I said finally. I do. She blinked, thrown off by my calmness. You don't get to weaponize my pain anymore, I added. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her expression. Not guilt, but doubt. The legal process began to pick up speed. Mr. Miller filed motions. Peterson responded aggressively, requesting extensive discovery. Both sides began gathering witness statements and financial records. I knew Mom and Dad would line up family members to paint me as unstable or rebellious. So I went on the offensive. I started quietly reaching out to people who knew my grandfather, his old neighbors, a retired farmhand who had worked at Horton Acres for decades, and even a few local community members in Vermont. Most of them remembered me as a little girl who followed Grandpa around the property during holidays. One neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, told me something that made my heart race. Your grandfather was so proud of you, she said over the phone. He told us more than once that Horton Acres would be yours, said you had the heart for it. I asked if she'd be willing to give a statement. She agreed without hesitation. Piece by piece, I built a network outside my parents' control. They couldn't twist those voices. They belonged to people who had nothing to gain from me or from them. Meanwhile, inside the house, the tension reached a breaking point. One evening, during dinner, Dad snapped. I hope you understand what you're doing to this family, he said suddenly, slamming his fork down. You're dragging our name through the mud. I set my glass down slowly. No, I'm dragging the truth into the light. Noah laughed. You sound like a bad TV lawyer. Bianca glared at him. Shut up, Noah. Dad turned to her sharply. Enough. But Bianca didn't back down this time. No, it's not enough, she said. You're acting like this is some betrayal, but maybe the betrayal happened a long time ago. The table went silent. Mom stared at Bianca as if seeing her for the first time. You don't know what you're talking about, Mom said coldly. Yes, I do, Bianca said quietly. Something cracked in the air then, a real fracture. It wasn't just me versus them anymore. Bianca was no longer pretending. Later that night, she came to my room again. I can't believe I said that, she whispered. Dad looked like he was going to explode. I think it needed to be said, I replied. She sat on the floor, hugging her knees. I used to think Mom and Dad were just strict, but they're actually ruthless. And I think Noah, too dumb to realize he's being used. I hesitated. Do you really think they'd throw him under the bus if it helped them? She looked at me with wide eyes. Wouldn't they? I thought about it. She was right. Mom and Dad weren't sentimental when it came to power. Noah was useful as long as he played his part. But if he ever became a liability, they'd cut him loose without blinking. Bianca sighed. This is going to get worse, isn't it? Yeah, I said softly. It is. When I went to sleep that night, I realized something strange. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not in the way I used to be. The house was still hostile, my parents were still dangerous, but fear had been replaced by focus. I was no longer reacting to their moves, I was anticipating them, and that changed everything. Peterson moved fast. Within a week of the court filings, my parents began their counterattack. Not in the courtroom, that would come later, but in the court of public opinion. It started with an article in a local lifestyle magazine. Prominent Horton family faces internal dispute, the headline read. The piece painted me as the estranged daughter, a troubled young woman influenced by outside legal forces. It quoted anonymous family friends who described me as unstable and ungrateful. I knew exactly who those anonymous sources were. By the end of the week, distant relatives started calling. Some were curious, some judgmental, some pretending to check in while clearly fishing for gossip. Aunt Louise, who lived 2 states away and hadn't seen me since I was 10, left a voicemail. Renata, sweetheart, I heard some awful things. I just want you to know families can disagree without going to court. I deleted it halfway through. Mom had always cared about appearances more than anything. Now she was using her greatest strength, social manipulation, against me. She hosted a brunch with a few family friends, made sure to invite the right people, wore the perfect dress, and casually mentioned that I was confused and under pressure. I could almost see the chessboard in her mind, each guessed a piece to be positioned strategically. Dad stayed mostly silent, but his silence was weaponized. He presented himself as the disappointed patriarch, calm, reasonable, wounded. To outsiders, it made me look like the rebellious child tearing down a legacy. If I hadn't prepared for it, it might have worked. Mr. Miller called me after the article came out. "This is classic reputation control," he said. "They're trying to isolate you socially so that when the case goes to trial, you'll look like the problem child. Don't take the bait." "I won't," I said, though part of me burned inside. Seeing my name twisted in public was worse than I'd expected. It wasn't just a family fight anymore. It was a narrative war. One Saturday, while they were hosting another casual gathering, I slipped away to the garage. There was a row of old filing cabinets along the far wall, relics from Dad's accounting business before he moved everything digital. I'd searched them before, but never in full. That day, I methodically opened each drawer, going through old tax returns, receipts, property records. In the third cabinet, I found a dusty box labeled Horton Archive. Inside were folders dating back to my grandfather's time. Most were mundane maintenance invoices, old photographs, a few letters, but tucked in the back was a thick envelope sealed with brittle tape. It was addressed in Grandpa's handwriting, to be opened upon my passing. I stared at it for a long time. My hands trembled as I carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter and a photocopy of a legal document. The letter was dated 3 months before his death. In it, Grandpa wrote, "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Renata, this land is yours not just because you're my granddaughter, but because you were the only one who listened. The others see acreage. You saw home. I've made sure my wishes are clear, but if they try to change things, look to the trust formation date. There's a flaw they won't see until it's too late." I read the last sentence 3 times. Look to the trust formation date. I unfolded the legal document attached. It was the original trust formation paperwork with notarized dates and signatures. And that's when I saw it. The trust was legally formed 2 days before Grandpa's death, but his signature was dated 3 days after. That was impossible. Either he signed after he died, a neat trick, or someone had backdated the trust documents. My heart pounded. This was it. This wasn't just a moral betrayal anymore. This was fraud. I photographed every page and immediately called Mr. Miller. He picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Miller," I said breathlessly, "I found something. The trust document, it's dated after Grandpa's death. His signature doesn't match the timeline." He was silent for a moment, then, "That's huge. If the trust formation was backdated, their entire legal structure collapses. We could prove fraud. Are you sure about the dates?" "I have the original copies," I said. "I'll bring them first thing Monday." "Renata, this changes everything," he said. "If this holds up, they're not just going to lose the property. They could face criminal liability." I hung up, my hands shaking. A part of me felt vindicated, but another part was terrified. This was bigger than I'd imagined. I wasn't just fighting to reclaim land anymore. I was about to expose something that could destroy them. That night, Mom knocked on my door unexpectedly. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "Can we talk?" she asked. I hesitated, then opened the door. She stepped inside, closing it softly behind her. "You're escalating this," she said. "I can feel it." I stayed quiet. "I know you think you found something," she continued. "Some letter, some paper that you believe will change everything. But Renata, you have no idea how deep this goes. You don't want to be on the other side of this family." "Maybe I already am," I said evenly. Her lips curved into a faint smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. "I'll give you one last chance to stop. No lawyers, no court. We settle this privately. We'll even give you something, a financial settlement." "And what do I give you?" I asked. "Your silence," she said simply. I almost laughed. "No." Something flickered in her face, surprise, then anger. "You have no idea what you're walking into," she said coldly. "Actually," I said, stepping closer, "I think you're the one who has no idea what I've already found." Her jaw tightened. For a split second, I saw something rare, fear. She left without another word. Sunday morning, the facade cracked. I came downstairs to find Dad pacing the living room with Peterson on speakerphone. "She's bluffing," Peterson was saying. "There's no way she has anything substantial." "She's not bluffing," Dad snapped. "She has something, I can tell." Mom sat on the couch, silent, eyes narrowed. Noah stumbled in half asleep, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" "Shut up and go upstairs," Dad barked. Noah blinked, confused, but did as he was told. They were rattled. I hadn't even made my move yet, but the tremors were starting. Monday morning, I met Mr. Miller in his office and handed him the envelope. He examined it carefully, comparing the notarized stamps, the dates, the handwriting. "This is real," he said. "And it's damning. If your grandfather's signature is dated after his death, then the trust isn't just invalid, it's evidence of fraud. They could face legal consequences far beyond losing the property." For the first time, I saw something in his face that I hadn't seen before: excitement. "We're going to amend the petition," he said. "We're no longer just challenging the trust, we're alleging fraudulent transfer." The game had changed, and they didn't even know the bomb I was about to drop. Once Mr. Miller amended the petition to include the fraud allegations, everything accelerated. Court dates were set. Deadlines were issued. Both sides were required to submit disclosures. What had started as a quiet legal skirmish was turning into a full-fledged war. My parents were livid, not just angry, cornered. For the first time, they weren't the ones dictating the pace. They were reacting to me. I came home one evening to find them in the living room, surrounded by papers. Peterson was on speakerphone again, his voice unusually tense. "This changes everything," he said. "If they can prove the signature was backdated, the trust won't hold up." Dad's voice was sharp. "Then we prove it was." "It's not that simple," Peterson replied. "The notarization is dated after your father's death. That's not something we can explain away easily." Mom cut in, icy and controlled. "Then we find a way." But there was something brittle in her tone now. For all her posturing, she knew this was serious. I slipped upstairs before they noticed me, but I heard every word. Over the next few weeks, my life split into two worlds. By day, I worked my regular shifts, met with Mr. Miller, gathered witness statements, and reviewed filings. By night, I lived in a house that no longer felt like mine. The walls seemed thinner, the air heavier. The family dinners, when they happened at all, were silent and brittle, like sitting at a table of strangers waiting for the storm to break. Bianca became my quiet anchor. We'd meet in whispered conversations late at night, piecing together their behavior. One night, she told me something that made my stomach turn. "They're talking about transferring some of the trust funds overseas," she whispered. "I overheard Dad on the phone with someone from the Cayman Islands." I stared at her. "They're trying to hide the money." She nodded grimly. "They think if they move it before the court orders anything, they can still walk away rich." I immediately told Mr. Miller. He was furious but focused. "If they transfer assets after the fraud allegation is filed, that's concealment. We can request a temporary injunction to freeze their accounts, but we'll need something solid: dates, amounts, proof." Bianca came through again. She managed to sneak into Dad's office while he was at the club and took photos of wire transfer drafts. They were planning to move millions from the Horton family trust into shell accounts overseas. It wasn't just inheritance theft anymore. It was financial crime. Mr. Miller moved swiftly, filing for an emergency injunction. 2 days later, a court order arrived freezing the Horton family trust's assets pending investigation. Dad's reaction was volcanic. I was upstairs when it happened. The sound of him slamming his office door echoed through the house. Mom tried to calm him down, but his voice roared through the walls. "She's ruining us," he shouted. "She's burning down everything for a piece of land." I heard glass shatter. For the first time in my life, I felt no urge to flinch. A week later, something unexpected happened. Peterson called me. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Why would their lawyer call me? But he asked to meet off the record. Mr. Miller was cautious but agreed to accompany me. We met Peterson at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown. He was composed, but his usually polished voice carried an edge. "I can't be officially involved," he began, "but I need to make something clear." "Your parents are lying to me?" I blinked. "What?" "They told me the trust was properly executed," he continued. "But I've seen the notary logs, they were altered. Someone tampered with the dates. If this goes to trial, I won't perjure myself for them." I stared at him, trying to read his motives. "Why tell me this?" "Because I'm not going down with them," he said simply. "I have a career, a reputation. If they want to commit fraud, they'll do it without my signature on anything." That was the second twist. Their own lawyer was preparing to distance himself. Peterson slid an envelope across the table. "These are copies of documents they gave me early on. You'll want to compare the notary seals with the official registry." Inside were notarization records, sloppy, mismatched, clearly tampered with. It was the missing link Mr. Miller had been searching for. When Peterson left, Mr. Miller let out a low whistle. "They just lost their lawyer's loyalty," he said. "It's a crack we can exploit." Back at home, the pressure cooker finally started to burst. Dad stopped speaking to me entirely. Mom oscillated between icy calm and emotional manipulation. One night, she knocked on my door again, this time with tears in her eyes. Renata, she said softly, you're tearing this family apart. I stared at her. No, you did that years ago when you lied. She shook her head like she couldn't comprehend it. I raised you, I gave you everything, and this is how you repay us. You didn't raise me, I said, my voice steady. You controlled me. Her face twisted, not in sadness but in rage. You'll regret this. I didn't answer. She left, slamming the door behind her. As the trial date approached, the family started to fracture. Noah became erratic. He alternated between bravado and panic. One night, I heard him yelling at Dad downstairs. You promised me, he shouted. You said this deal was locked in? Dad's voice was low but furious. Shut up before you make it worse. Mom tried to keep the family dinners going, but they turned into quiet power plays. Noah drinking too much, Bianca refusing to meet Mom's gaze, Dad simmering in silence, and me sitting across from them, no longer the obedient daughter but the storm they had created. The biggest shift, though, wasn't external. It was internal. For years, I'd defined myself in relation to them, the forgotten daughter, the quiet one, the one who stayed out of the way. But now, with every motion filed, every document uncovered, every lie peeled back, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years: agency. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was leading, and they were scrambling to catch up. The courthouse smelled like old wood and tension. The first hearing wasn't the full trial yet. It was a preliminary injunction hearing to determine whether the trust should remain frozen and whether there was enough evidence to move forward with the fraud allegations. But to me, it felt like stepping onto a stage I'd spent my whole life avoiding. Mom arrived in a tailored navy suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, face composed like a woman attending a charity gala. Dad wore his usual crisp gray suit, jaw clenched. Noah trailed behind, trying to look important but clearly hungover. Bianca sat beside me on the bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When they walked in, Mom's eyes found mine. She smiled, that rehearsed, camera-ready smile, the same one she'd used to charm reporters or disarm dinner guests. But behind it, I saw the steel. This was no longer family. This was war. Peterson didn't appear. They replaced him with a younger, aggressive attorney named Daniels, a litigator known for his scorched-earth tactics. Peterson's quiet exit from the case had clearly shaken them, but they tried to compensate with aggression. Mr. Miller leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. Let the evidence do the heavy lifting." The judge, a stern woman with a sharp gaze, opened the hearing promptly. Daniels launched into a performance almost immediately. He painted me as an emotionally volatile young woman attempting to seize family assets through speculative claims. He brought up my teenage therapy records, old school reports, even an argument I'd had with Mom at 17 that somehow made its way into his statement. Mom sat behind him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue at exactly the right moments. It was nauseatingly precise. Then it was Mr. Miller's turn. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He simply laid out the facts. The trust's notarization was dated after my grandfather's death. Multiple witness statements corroborated my grandfather expressed intent to leave Horton Acres to me. Financial records showed attempts to transfer trust funds overseas after the fraud allegation was filed. Peterson, their former counsel, had withdrawn rather than support their timeline. One by one, he submitted the documents. The judge's eyes narrowed as she examined the notarization dates. Daniels tried to object, but the judge cut him off. "If these dates are accurate," she said sharply, "this is not just a trust dispute. This is potential fraud. Counsel, I hope your clients are prepared to answer serious questions." For the first time, Mom's mask cracked. She glanced at Dad, who shifted uncomfortably. Noah looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The hearing lasted 3 hours. At the end, the judge granted the injunction to freeze all trust assets and set a trial date for the fraud allegations. Her final words echoed through the courtroom. "Given the evidence presented, this court finds sufficient cause to proceed. Any further attempt to move or conceal assets will be considered contempt. You are officially on notice." It was just a preliminary hearing, but it felt like the tide had turned. The fallout at home was immediate. As soon as we walked through the door, Dad exploded. "You humiliated us," he roared, slamming his hand against the kitchen counter. "You dragged our name through the mud in front of the entire town." I stood there, calm. "No, I told the truth." "You're going to regret this," he hissed. "You think a judge is going to hand you the farm and let us walk away broke? You're delusional." "You stole it," I said simply. "You built your comfort on lies. If that collapses, that's on you." Mom tried to regain control, stepping between us. "Renata, you've made your point. Drop this before it goes too far." It's already gone too far, I replied. Bianca stepped forward then, something fierce in her eyes. They're the ones who went too far, you lied to all of us. Noah laughed bitterly. Oh, great. Two of you now? Shut up, Noah, Bianca snapped. You don't even understand what's happening. I understand enough, he spat. I was supposed to get my share, now it's all frozen because of her. That's because you were part of the scam, I said coldly. You knew, you helped. His face flushed. I didn't forge anything. But you were willing to profit from it, I said. That makes you complicit. He lunged forward, but Dad stopped him with a hand on his chest. The room buzzed with barely contained fury. The weeks leading up to the trial were a blur of depositions, paperwork, and tense silences. Daniels went on the offensive, trying to delay proceedings, request unnecessary disclosures, and intimidate witnesses. But Mr. Miller countered every move with surgical precision. The more they tried to stall, the more desperate they looked. Meanwhile, my relationship with Bianca grew stronger. One night, while we sat on the porch under a quiet sky, she whispered, I don't know how you're staying so calm. I'm not, I admitted. I'm terrified half the time, but I'm more tired of being powerless than I am afraid. She nodded slowly. They're not the people I thought they were. They never were, I said softly. We just didn't want to see it. The second major crack came from Noah. One evening, I overheard him on the phone in the garage, his voice low but frantic. I need that money, he hissed. I don't care how. If Dad won't give it to me, I'll tell them everything. I froze. He wasn't talking to Mom or Dad. He was talking to someone else, likely one of the developers. Panic and self-preservation were finally overriding his arrogance. Later, Bianca confirmed it. He's been drinking more, she said. And he's scared. He's not loyal to them, Renata. If it comes down to saving himself, he'll talk. And that's exactly what Mr. Miller needed, someone from inside willing to testify. The night before the trial, the house was eerily quiet. Mom retreated to her room early. Dad locked himself in his office. Noah disappeared to God knows where. Bianca and I sat on the stairs in our pajamas like we used to as kids, only now the stakes were life-altering. Tomorrow everything changes, she said. Yeah, I whispered. One way or another. I went to bed that night with the strange mix of fear and clarity that only comes before a storm. The little girl who used to shrink in this house was gone. What remained was someone who finally saw every piece on the board for what it was. And tomorrow, I was going to make my move. The morning of the trial, the sky was a muted gray, the kind that made everything feel heavy. I arrived at the courthouse early with Mr. Miller. We didn't speak much on the way in, there was nothing left to strategize. All the motions had been filed, all the evidence had been exchanged. What remained was the truth. Mom and Dad arrived 30 minutes later, walking side by side like royalty entering a gala. Mom wore a pristine cream suit. Dad's face was carved from stone. Noah trailed behind again, looking jumpy. Bianca walked beside me. She wasn't required to testify, but she refused to sit at home. As we entered the courtroom, I saw familiar faces in the gallery, distant relatives, neighbors, a few reporters. This wasn't just a family fight anymore. It had become public theater. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then it began. Daniels, their new lawyer, launched into a rehearsed opening statement. He painted them as benevolent parents misunderstood by a rebellious daughter. He implied I was motivated by greed, that I was exploiting minor procedural irregularities to seize family wealth. He even tried to subtly undermine Bianca, calling her emotionally influenced. Then Mr. Miller stood. He didn't give a speech. He laid out the facts like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. The notarization date on the trust was 3 days after my grandfather's death. The notary's official log showed the same. Witnesses testified that Grandpa expressed his intention clearly and repeatedly. Horton Acres was meant for me. Peterson's quiet withdrawal and envelope of documents confirmed internal inconsistencies. The family attempted to transfer millions overseas after the fraud petition was filed. As he spoke, the judge's face hardened. Then came the witnesses. Mrs. Callahan took the stand first, the elderly neighbor who'd known my grandfather for decades. Her voice was clear as she told the court, he loved that land. He always said Renata would keep it safe. He told us more than once, Bianca will dance in cities, Noah will chase money, but Renata sees the soil. Then the notary herself testified. She confirmed under oath that she had been asked to notarize posthumously. She refused, but someone else altered the documents after the fact. Her testimony landed like a hammer blow. Mom's face didn't move, but her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Dad's jaw twitched. Then something I hadn't fully expected happened. Noah took the stand. Daniels had planned to use him to paint me as unstable. But under questioning, Noah crumbled. He admitted to knowing about the development deal. He admitted Dad had promised him a cut. Under cross-examination by Mr. Miller, his arrogance melted into panic. "Did you know the trust was created after your grandfather's death?" Miller asked. I didn't know exactly," Noah stammered. "Dad said it was all handled." "So when you presented investors with a plan to build a resort on Horton Acres, you didn't think to ask if the property was legally yours to sell?" he faltered. "I trusted Dad." "Thank you," Miller said simply. The courtroom was silent. Noah glanced at Mom, then Dad, but neither of them looked at him. For the first time, he was alone. The defense tried to salvage the situation by having Dad testify. It was a disaster. Under Daniel's guidance, Dad tried to present himself as the calm patriarch, but Miller's questioning was relentless. When asked directly about the notarization dates, Dad dodged. When pressed about the overseas transfers, he claimed financial prudence. When confronted with Peterson's documents, he grew visibly agitated. Finally, Miller asked the question that hung over everything. "Mr. Horton, did you instruct someone to alter legal documents after your father's death to transfer ownership of Horton Acres into the family trust?" Dad's silence lasted too long. The judge leaned forward. "You are under oath, Mr. Horton." His eyes flicked to Mom. She gave him the faintest shake of her head. He exhaled slowly. "No," he said. Miller handed him a document. "Then can you explain this email you sent to your accountant on April 6th? The one that says, quote, 'Make sure the date lines up with the trust formation.' He's gone, but the paperwork can't reflect that." The color drained from his face. Mom's mask cracked then. Her hand shot out as if to grab the paper, but it was too late. The gallery murmured. The judge's gavel slammed down for silence. That was the moment the entire facade collapsed. The closing arguments were almost unnecessary. Daniels scrambled to argue technicalities, but the judge wasn't buying it. Mr. Miller spoke last, his voice quiet but steady. "This case isn't about greed," he said. "It's about honoring a man's wishes and holding people accountable for deception. The evidence speaks for itself. This was a coordinated effort to strip Renata Horton of her legal inheritance through fraudulent means, and it nearly worked until she stood up." The judge didn't rule that day. She adjourned to deliberate, but the courtroom energy had shifted. Everyone knew what had just happened. Mom and Dad walked out first, silent, brittle. Noah lingered, looking lost. Bianca stayed by my side. Outside, reporters called my name. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. For the first time, the truth had been laid bare in a place they couldn't control. That night, the house felt like a ruin. Dad locked himself in the office. Mom didn't come out of her room. Noah disappeared into the night. Bianca and I sat in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. "Do you think they'll go to jail?" she asked softly. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But whatever happens, it won't be like before." She nodded. "You changed everything." I looked around the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd once stood silently while they planned vacations without me, where I'd eaten meals in quiet resentment, where I'd been invisible. It didn't feel like their house anymore. It felt like a house waiting to be emptied, and I was finally ready to walk out of it on my own terms. The judge delivered her ruling 2 weeks later. I was sitting in Mr. Miller's office when the email came through. He opened it, scanned the first few lines, then looked up at me with a slow, almost relieved smile. "You won," he said simply. The words hung in the air for a moment, like I couldn't quite process them. Then he handed me the printed decision. My hands trembled slightly as I read. "The court finds that the Horton Family Trust was created using fraudulent notarization and improper execution. The trust is hereby dissolved. Ownership of Horton Acres reverts to the sole beneficiary named in the original will, Renata Horton. Additionally, the court orders a full financial audit of the Horton Family Trust. Any attempts to conceal or transfer assets will be referred to the district attorney's office for investigation." I exhaled slowly, a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. It was over. Not the emotional mess that would take longer, but the legal war. The land was mine. The truth was on record. Miller poured us both a small glass of champagne. "I don't usually drink in the office," he said with a rare grin, "but this feels like an exception." We toasted quietly. It wasn't a cinematic victory, no roaring crowds or fireworks, but it was real, solid, irrefutable. At home, the atmosphere was different. It wasn't loud anymore, it was hollow. Dad had retreated almost completely into silence. When I came downstairs the evening after the ruling, he was sitting in the dark living room, staring at nothing. He didn't speak as I passed. For years, his silence had been a form of control. Now it just sounded like defeat. Mom tried to keep up appearances for a few days, talking to relatives, spinning news stories about legal misunderstandings and technicalities. But as the court's financial auditors began combing through their accounts, the facade crumbled. She stopped attending charity luncheons. The calls she made were no longer strategic, they were desperate. Noah disappeared for 3 nights. When he came back, he looked like someone who'd seen his own reflection for the first time and didn't like what he saw. He avoided me completely. I didn't chase him. That wasn't my job anymore. Bianca, though, she stayed close. One night, a week after the ruling, we sat on the back porch. The summer air was warm, cicadas buzzing in the distance. She leaned her head on my shoulder like we were kids again. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," I corrected. She laughed softly. "I didn't do much. You were my eyes and ears when I couldn't be everywhere. That's not nothing." She went quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do now?" The question had been circling in my mind for days. I'd spent so long fighting for something that I hadn't really allowed myself to imagine what came after. Horton Acres was legally mine now. I could sell it, rebuild it, move on to it, leave it untouched. But more than the land, what I'd won was freedom. "I think I'm going to Vermont," I said finally. "Not just to visit, to live." Her head lifted from my shoulder. "Seriously, seriously," I said, smiling faintly. "Grandpa built that place to last. I want to see what it can become, not for them, but for me." She exhaled slowly, like she'd known the answer before I said it. The house didn't explode when I left. There was no dramatic shouting match, no slammed doors. I packed quietly, loading my car with boxes of clothes, books, and the handful of keepsakes that actually meant something to me. When I closed the door to my childhood bedroom for the last time, it felt like closing a book whose ending I finally understood. Mom watched from the kitchen doorway as I carried the last box out. Her face was unreadable. "Renata," she said. I paused, turning to her. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, she didn't have a script. "Goodbye, Mom," I said softly. She didn't answer. Dad didn't come out to see me off. Noah wasn't home. Bianca hugged me so tight I almost couldn't breathe. "You better call me every week," she said, trying to sound stern. "I will," I promised. Then I got in the car and drove. The first time I set foot on Horton Acres as its rightful owner, it was just after dawn. Mist hung low over the fields, and the air smelled like earth and pine. The farmhouse was weathered but still standing strong, the porch creaking under my boots like it recognized me. I walked through every room slowly, fingers tracing the worn wood, the old beams. I found Grandpa's chair still in the corner of the living room, dust on the armrests but solid as ever. For years, this place had been a distant symbol, something whispered about but kept just out of reach. Now it was real. Mine. I spent the first few weeks cleaning, repairing, and breathing. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and step out onto the porch, looking at the stars, letting the quiet settle into my bones. For the first time in my life, silence didn't mean danger. It meant peace. The auditors uncovered more than I'd expected. Dad had siphoned off funds from the trust for years, moving them through shell companies. Mom had signed off on transactions she claimed not to fully understand. Noah had taken money under the table to fund his failed ventures. The district attorney opened a formal investigation. I didn't celebrate their downfall. Watching it unfold was surreal, like witnessing a slow landslide. All I'd ever wanted was the truth. What happened to them afterward was the natural consequence of their choices. Bianca moved into her own apartment nearby. We visited often. Sometimes we talked about the past, sometimes we didn't. She told me she was applying for jobs away from Mom and Dad's influence. "I need to build something that's mine," she said. I understood that better than anyone. Months later, I stood on the hill overlooking the fields at sunset. The house behind me was no longer just my grandfather. It was becoming mine, my fingerprints on every repaired wall, my plans drawn on every piece of scrap paper, my laughter echoing in rooms that used to hold whispers. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who sat quietly at family dinners, invisible. The one who cleaned up after everyone else. The one who thought love meant obedience. She was gone. In her place stood someone who had walked into court alone, stood up to a lifetime of manipulation, and didn't flinch when the truth got ugly. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. Of land, of legacy, of myself. When people ask what happened, I don't tell them the whole saga. I tell them the truth in one sentence. They tried to erase me. I refused to disappear. And every morning when I step out onto that porch and see the fields stretching toward the horizon, I know I made the right choice. This was never just about winning a case. It was about finally choosing me.